Did you kill that woman?
No, sir.
But you told the police that you did.
Yes, sir.
Manipulate you, threaten you, pretty much do whatever it takes to secure a confession from you.
This is the most important hour of your entire life. And you know what else?
Why would anyone confess to a crime they did not commit? It happens so often in Chicago. Defense attorneys call the city the false confession capital of the United States.
Well, that is a lot of pressure. It must be so intimidating to be questioned for hours by police officials about a horrific crime. According to a study through the Innocence Project, it is estimated that there are about 30% of people who give a false confession due to many different contributing factors. Either the person really doesn't understand what's going on, maybe due to a lower IQ. Sometimes the person just gives up and they just can't take it anymore, so they just tell the officer or the investigator whatever they want to hear just so it's over, or straight up they're just intimidated. Well, what's happening, you guys? I'm Dassey, and welcome back to another Most Amazing Top 10 video. Let's jump right into this one. This is the top 10 people who confessed to a crime they did not commit.
There's a lot of life that you missed being in prison.
Yeah, I don't even know how to drive a car. And it ain't supposed to happen in America, you know.
So that was Lee Taylor, who was an innocent man who served 42 years in prison. I mean, it's absolutely sad. It's sickening. The research for this video was actually extremely hard for me because I feel so bad. I feel so bad for these people. Alright, let's get started with this list. In at number 10, we have Tyler Edmonds, who was 13 years old when he falsely confessed to a murder he never did. Well, that moment will haunt him for the rest of his life because he spent 14 years behind bars trying to prove that he never committed the murder. At 13 years old, it's hard to understand certain things. The legal system is very complex and how it works. Well, this is Tyler Edmonds' story.
Time in prison took so many experiences away from me.
Tyler's sister, who actually committed the awful crime, convinced her brother to take the blame for her.
Christy convinced me to confess at her mother's house. That's when she told me that she was the one who had killed Joey.
Tyler's older sister kept telling him that you have to take the blame. You're only 13 years old, so nothing is actually going to happen. But if I take the blame, I'm gonna be in prison forever. She also said that they don't punish children. Tyler's never ever been sent to a principal's office before. He's never gotten in trouble. And he actually believed his sister, because why not? It's family.
Yellow County Sheriff's Department, and your name is Tyler Edmonds, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And your age 13?
Yes, sir.
He looked so damn young in the video because, well, he was. I think there should be a parent involved. Or if this kid is about to give a confession, I think a lawyer should be present. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below. Number 9.
But was subjected to an overnight interrogation during which he was denied sleep. After over 8 hours of questioning and despite being innocent, Damon confessed to raping and murdering his cousin.
So that was 22-year-old Damon Thibodeaux, who was just 22 years old at the time his cousin was murdered. Well, over 15 years went by, and finally the truth came out, that he wasn't the one that murdered his cousin. Damon Thibodeaux was wrongly convicted. He was actually on death row for 15 years, and it wasn't until DNA testing became available to him that it was proven that he actually can't be the right person. Also, because Damon Thibodeaux was on death row, he was put into solitary confinement the whole time. The interrogation lasted 9 hours straight, and only 54 minutes of those hours were recorded. It's probably a really biased confession, like take out all the parts they don't want in there. Well, during those 54 minutes, you can hear Damon Thibodeaux confessing to crimes he never committed just so it can end.
Confession was factually inconsistent with the actual crime in many ways.
Now that he is out of prison, he is now an active speaker for wrongful conviction reform, but now he will always have to relive these moments in his mind forever.
You know, you're in a chair with a desk. They're allowed to manipulate you, threaten you, pretty much do whatever it takes to secure a confession from you.
It's just so wrong. I know investigators are trying to do what they can do, and they gotta put some sort of like pressure on these people to try to get the truth out, but when is that pressure like too much pressure, and when is it wrong? I think a conviction shouldn't be solely on a confession, especially if it's an extensive length of interrogation. The famous Brendan Dassey case comes up next on our list at number 8. Brendan Dassey, who has a very low IQ and wasn't really good at communicating, was interrogated for a rape and murder when he was just 16 years old. Well, after after clearly being coerced into a confession, Brendan Dassey was convicted of first-degree murder, mutilation of a corpse, and second-degree sexual assault. Those are some pretty serious crimes. He was sentenced to life in prison with the eligibility for parole in 2048. So that's when he's going to be 59 years old, which is extremely sad. Brendan Dassey wasn't able to understand much. He has a lower IQ, and he thought that if he just told investigators what they wanted to hear, that he would be able to just go back to school.
Because no one knew that, and here, if he came out and said it, then it must be the truth. And so they kept asking him, come on, Brendan, something else happened to her now. We know something else happened to her. And eventually they got more specific. What else happened to her? Something happened to her head.
Brendan Dassey during the whole interrogation was fed information that they can actually use against him. Investigators were actually getting frustrated with Brendan Dassey at one point because he wasn't understanding, the hints that they were giving him. The investigator needed him to say certain things. They needed him to say that the woman was shot, but he just wasn't saying it. So the investigators just came out and actually just told him what to say. Okay, Brendan Dassey, we have all the evidence. Who shot her in the head?
That's all I can remember.
All right, I'm just gonna come out and ask you, who shot her in the head?
He did.
Why didn't you tell us that?
This case is a very interesting case, and if you guys want to know more about the Brendan Dassey or the Stephen Avery case, Stephen Avery being his uncle, well, you guys should check out Making a Murderer on Netflix. It's actually so good. Moving on to number 7.
Traumatic twilight zone. That's how Johnny Lee Avery describes his wrongful conviction for a double murder and rape when he was just 14 years old.
Just 14 years old. Come on, justice system. How does that make sense? This is a minor who was intensely interrogated. The poor teen wasn't even given the rights by the police officers. It took nearly 40 years for the actual truth to come out that Johnny Lee Avery wasn't actually the person who raped and fatally stabbed 14-year-old James Robinson Jr. and his sister 19-year-old Connie Cooper. Johnny's confession was coerced, and it took almost 40 years to figure that out.
Claiming his initial, later tossed confession was coerced, evidence was fabricated and destroyed, and that he was subjected to an unconstitutional interrogation without parent or attorney for 31 hours.
If I was in that room for 31 hours, I bet they can make me say whatever they wanted to make me say. I'm trying hard not to be over dramatic here, but that kind of sounds like a form of torture. Someone else who's in prison for a very long time is next up at number 6. This right here is Joan Taylor, and her story is really sad. She was falsely in prison for 19 years for rape and murder. I mean, that is some pretty serious crimes that she didn't commit. Interrogators threatened Taylor to come clean with the crime. They said that they already know what she has done, and they don't have a problem with putting her on death row if she doesn't tell, the truth, what they want her to say. I mean, if someone threatens you with death row, wouldn't you just make up a lie that they're forcing you to tell? Because it's better to be in prison alive than to be confined in solitary confinement until it's time, for that lethal injection.
You just need to come clean. You know what happened. You'll be the first female on death row. We don't have a problem murdering, executing women if they're just as guilty as the men.
At the time Taylor was in her 20s, she just got married, she has a newborn, the baby's 14 months old. She had a lot going on for her when she was arrested and interrogated. During this time, Taylor just wanted to go home with her family. She didn't know what the police officers were talking about. She didn't know about the crime or the details that they were describing. The interrogators really emotionally drained this woman to the point that she was crying so much, and she was becoming upset even more and more, and she was just so confused.
It was enough to start making you think. And when I knew how much I drank back in '85, because I quit drinking shortly after I left Beatrice, when I realized that how much I used to drink.
At this point, she was trying to tell them whatever they wanted to hear, and she wasn't even saying the right things because she just didn't know what was happening. So after suffering from delusions and fearing the death penalty, she just admitted to murdering Helen Wilson. Because of the long prison sentence, Taylor lost the connection with her family. She didn't even come face to face with her 14-month-old son until she was released from prison. I mean, that's really sad. Number 5.
I was told that I was going to die in jail. I was never going home. I was scared for my life. and I was screaming out that I'm innocent, and no one heard me.
So that is Terrell Swift, who was convicted back in 1994 for a murder. An autopsy report concluded that the woman who was murdered was strangulated to death. Terrell Swift was brought in for questioning to find out if he had any involvement with this murder. There was no trace of physical evidence that connected this man to the crime, but it was his own conviction that got him locked up for 15 years.
I was coerced and tricked into signing a confession, which ultimately led to me being convicted and spending 15.5 years in prison.
It's just so sad, and what a tragedy. It really is. It just seems like police just wants to be able to close a case, and it doesn't really matter if they have the right person or not. I mean, for the past 15 years, Terrell Swift lost his life while the actual person who committed the murder is out there, you know, living their life, and who knows if they killed someone else or not, because clearly they're capable of murder. Terrell Swift's story got me really emotional. Number 4. This is Juan Rivera, who was released after he served a long time in prison after he gave a false confession. Juan Rivera was actually wrongly convicted 3 times, and because of what happened to him, he was actually given the largest wrongful conviction settlement in US history. He was given $20 million. I mean, good, I think everyone wrongly convicted should be entitled to a settlement payout. Juan Rivera was convicted of rape and stabbing an 11-year-old to death 27 times. There was no physical evidence, there was no DNA evidence that linked Juan to these crimes back in '92. After years of being in prison, Rivera kept fighting to try and get more DNA tests done to prove he isn't even the right person. For some reason, it can take years to have certain tests done, and sometimes these tests or motions are just denied. Well, for Rivera, finally his motion to test swab that was taken from the crime scene, well, it was finally granted, and the test came back showing that his DNA is not even at the crime scene. So what the heck? Number 3.
At just 19 years old, Ryan Ferguson was wrongly convicted of murder. He served nearly a decade in prison, all the while maintaining his innocence.
So that was Ryan Ferguson, who is a personal trainer, he's an author. Well, he spent 10 years in prison after being wrongly convicted for a murder in his hometown of Columbia, Missouri. Ferguson was a 17-year-old high school student at the time.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said to you earlier, man. Oh my God. Trying to get me to admit to something I didn't do.
Even during the intense investigation, Ryan Ferguson said, "You're trying to make me admit to something I didn't even do." The case against Ryan Ferguson was so brutal, it seemed like police or investigators got other people to admit things that they didn't even do. One of Ryan's close friends seemed to admit to doing something to the crime as well, and in court it seemed like Ryan's friend knew all of the details to what happened.
To remember everything.
And he was down here and he had a belt. And he had his foot on his back, on the victim's back. And he was pulling up on the belt.
Well, after 10 years went by, we find out that everything was a lie. Ryan Ferguson wasn't even at the scene of the crime, and he was 100% not involved with the murder he was being accused of. It just shows you the length that police or investigators would go through to try to have a conviction. Not even like spend all these resources on finding the truth. It just seems like to them, it doesn't matter who the fault person is. And number 2, let's actually talk about Ryan's friend. Well, his friend's name is Chuck Erickson. And he totally gave a false confession that affected himself, his own life, and his friends. Well, I should probably say former friend because, I mean, what the heck. It seemed like the pressure of the interrogation got to Chuck Erickson as well, that he had to make up a whole story to try to get out of, going to prison for a very long time. He admitted to things he never did, and Chuck Erickson wanted to make it seem like Ryan was the one who did the killing, and he was just there. But now we all know that both of them weren't even at the crime scene.
I felt the need to give a story that didn't have me as the main person.
Admits.
I lied and said I remember things I didn't remember and said he did stuff that I don't remember him doing or me doing.
I know for me, I used to wonder, well, why the heck would people even confess to something that they didn't do? And well, we have our answers. It's for many different reasons, and the pressure it can get to you. It can get to anybody. Sometimes it's better to confess and take deals. I mean, take a look at this next clip. You're about to see how pressured Chuck Erickson felt. He felt like his life was on the line.
Look, man, I do not remember. I don't know. And they started telling me, well, we're going to put your head on a chopping block which to me basically tells me I'm going to be executed.
So he built a confession based on fear.
Because I was thinking about myself.
And finally, at number 1, we have James Harden. And no, I'm not talking about the NBA player. That would be insane. James Harden was convicted of a murder after he confessed to the crime. He was sentenced to 120 years in prison.
Defendant James Harden says he was told by police if he signed the confession, he'd be released immediately.
They had the statement already wrote up, and the man say, "Do you want to go home and sleep in your bed tonight?" So I said, hell yeah.
I mean, is this real life right now? This is not right. James never got home that night. Instead, he had to put on the orange jumpsuit. James Harden had to wear that suit for the next 16 years. He was frightened, terrified, confused, and only 17 years old when he was forced into a confession that would change the rest of his life. James Harden literally signed his life away. This is why it is super important to know exactly what you're signing. And I remember when I was in grade, I think grade like 6, maybe grade 7, first day of school I had a new teacher. The teacher handed out some sheets, there was a lot of information on it. It was double-sided. He told us to turn over the page, sign on the bottom, and then all of a sudden he collected the papers. He then read out what the paper said. It said something like, if you agree to all the terms on this paper, make sure you sign it. So my signature's on the paper, the whole class's signature's on the paper. And the paper said, everything that belongs to us now belongs to the teacher. There was a bunch of things on the paper that if we knew what it was, we never would have signed it. The teacher taught us a tough lesson on the first day of school. Luckily he had a shredder and he literally shredded it all up. And we all found it funny, but for these people on this list, it's no joke. It's not funny. It's real life. I think it's a horrible crime to make someone sign something that they have no idea what it is, or make them confess to something that they didn't do with false promises. Well, there you guys have it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you guys want to see a part 2 of this, put hashtag part 2 in the comment section below, and if there's enough of you guys, we'll do it. So that's it for me. I'll see you guys all in the next most amazing top 10 video.
Confessions or admissions were present in approximately 25% of wrongful convictions of people later exonerated by DNA evidence. Turns out they were innocent. These cases are crystal clear because we have the DNA. So they didn't do the crime, and yet 1/4 of them confessed to it anyway.